I'm sitting here in my home office in San Francisco, looking back at everything that happened over the past 18 months, and I'm still processing all of it. Let me start from the very beginning and explain how I ended up in this bizarre situation. I'm 35 years old and work as a tech consultant in Silicon Valley. I've been doing this for about a decade now, and I've been pretty successful at it, but you would never know it by looking at me or observing my lifestyle. I drive a beat-up old Ford pickup truck that stands out like a sore thumb in parking lots full of Teslas, BMWs, and other luxury vehicles. I wear basic jeans and simple button-down shirts, nothing designer or flashy whatsoever. My whole approach to life is intentionally low-key and understated, avoiding any kind of ostentation. This philosophy comes directly from how I was raised. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, with just my mother. My dad wasn't in the picture at all. Mom worked 2 jobs, often pulling double shifts at different places just to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. We never had much money, but she gave me absolutely everything I needed to succeed in life. She made sure I had what I needed for school, encouraged my education, and taught me values that stuck. The biggest lesson my mother drilled into me was that you don't need to show off to prove your worth to anyone. She would always say to let your actions speak for themselves rather than your possessions. That philosophy became deeply ingrained in me and stuck even after I started making serious money later in life. Even now, I can picture her exhausted face coming home from another double shift, and it keeps me grounded. And when I say I started making serious money, I really mean it. My consulting work brings in approximately $1.5 million every single year. I work with Fortune 500 companies on major projects, close 7-figure deals on a regular basis, and I've built up substantial savings and investments over the years. My financial advisors manage offshore accounts and diverse portfolios that most people would consider wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But here's the thing. Absolutely nobody knew about this. Not my colleagues at work, not my friends, and definitely not my wife, Melissa. I kept my true financial situation completely private and confidential because I didn't want money to change the dynamics of my relationships or make people see me differently or treat me a certain way. I wanted people to value me for who I was as a person, not for what I had in my bank accounts. Melissa and I had been married for 5 years when everything fell apart. We lived in a nice suburban house that I'd purchased for about $1.5 million, which is pretty standard for our area of Silicon Valley. She drove a brand new Audi luxury vehicle that I'd bought for her outright, and she had an entire closet packed full of designer clothes and expensive accessories. We were comfortable by any reasonable person's standards. We had everything we needed and more. But here's where the problem started. Melissa worked in real estate and was constantly surrounded by people showing off their wealth and talking about their latest purchases. She'd come home every day with stories about her colleagues buying new vacation homes, trading up to more expensive cars, or renovating their houses with the latest trendy designs. At first, it was just casual conversation and I didn't think much of it. But over time, I noticed she was becoming more and more fixated on these material things and what other people had. She started dropping hints about wanting to upgrade our kitchen or move to a bigger, more impressive house in a fancier neighborhood. She'd mentioned how this person just completely remodeled their entire home, or how that person bought a second property in Tahoe or Hawaii. I would usually just brush these comments off because honestly, what we already had was more than enough. Our kitchen was perfectly functional and modern. Our house had plenty of space for just the 2 of us. I didn't see any logical reason to spend huge amounts of money just for the sake of spending it or keeping up with others. Things really started deteriorating rapidly after we attended a dinner party at her friend's place one evening. Jessica and Brandon Anderson had just purchased this absolutely enormous Mediterranean-style mansion up in Los Altos Hills for $8 million. The property was ridiculously over the top with perfectly manicured gardens maintained by professional landscapers, a marble fountain in the circular driveway, high ceilings everywhere, imported materials from Europe, and a temperature-controlled wine cellar that Brandon could not stop bragging about all night long. The entire evening felt like an extended house tour with them showing off every single expensive detail and design choice. Brandon kept mentioning how much everything cost and where they'd sourced various materials. Jessica talked endlessly about their decorator and the months of planning that went into everything. I played along politely, nodding and making the appropriate impressed noises at all the right moments. But internally, I was growing tired of the whole show. What really bothered me, though, was watching Melissa's reaction to all of it. I couldn't help noticing how her eyes absolutely lit up at every new extravagance they revealed. The longing and envy in her expression was impossible to miss for anyone paying attention. She was practically vibrating with desire for what they had. She kept touching their marble countertops, admiring their custom cabinets, and asking detailed questions about costs and contractors. During dinner, which featured expensive Wagyu beef and wines that Jason wouldn't shut up about, the conversation turned to my work. Brandon asked how business was going in tech consulting. I gave a modest answer, saying there was plenty of work to go around in the valley and I couldn't complain. Brandon chuckled and said the real money was probably in starting your own company rather than consulting, and asked if I'd ever thought about making that entrepreneurial leap. Before I could even respond, Melissa jumped in and said I wasn't really the entrepreneurial type and that I preferred the stability of consulting work. There was something in her voice when she said it, disappointment maybe, or embarrassment. Brandon said smoothly that there was nothing wrong with that, though I definitely caught the patronizing edge to his smile. He added that we can't all be risk takers. The conversation moved on, but I found myself withdrawing and becoming quieter as the evening progressed. I watched as Melissa laughed too loudly at Brandon's jokes, her eyes sparkling in a way they hadn't around me in months. When Jessica started talking about their upcoming luxury vacation to the Maldives with first-class flights and overwater bungalows, I saw the undressed envy on Melissa's face. She wanted that life so badly, I could practically feel it radiating off her. It was nearly midnight by the time we finally said our goodbyes and left. The drive home in her Audi was tense and quiet, with this palpable tension thrumming between us like a live electrical wire. About halfway home, Melissa finally broke the silence. She said they seemed really happy together. I just grunted noncommittally, not sure what to say. Then Melissa started going on about Jessica's kitchen and how amazing it must be to cook in a space like that. She brought up how we'd talked about remodeling our own kitchen years ago and asked if I remembered. I said, perhaps a bit more sharply than I'd intended, that our kitchen worked just fine. Melissa's lips pressed into this thin, tight line. She said she wasn't saying our kitchen didn't work, but wouldn't it be nice to have something a little more modern and updated? She pointed out we'd been in the same house for 5 years now and asked if I didn't think it was time for some kind of upgrade. I felt my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I told her we didn't need an upgrade because we had everything we needed. Melissa muttered something under her breath about the difference between need and want. She said, "Don't you ever want more than just getting by?" Those words hit me like an actual physical slap. Getting by? We lived in a $1.5 million home in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the entire country. She drove a luxury vehicle and had a closet full of designer clothes that cost more than some people make in a year. How could she possibly think we were just getting by? But of course, she had absolutely no idea about the true extent of our wealth. I'd always kept my finances completely private, not wanting money to change the dynamic of our relationship. Now, I was starting to seriously wonder if that had been a terrible mistake. The rest of the drive home passed in tense, uncomfortable silence. By the time we pulled into our garage, my patience was hanging by an extremely thin thread. I announced I was going to bed because I had an early meeting the next morning. Melissa's face fell and she said we should talk. I cut her off and said not tonight, that I was exhausted. I felt a twinge of guilt at the hurt look on her face, but I pushed it aside. I needed time alone to think and figure out how we'd ended up so far apart, without me even fully realizing it was happening. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned for hours, with Melissa's words echoing repeatedly in my head. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were a confused jumble of dollar signs, disappointed faces, and arguments about money. The next few weeks passed in this weird haze where I threw myself even deeper into work, and we had increasingly stilted, awkward conversations at home. I started taking on even more clients in an effort to distract myself from the growing distance between Melissa and me. She, in turn, seemed to be spending more and more time with her real estate colleagues and friends. She'd come home later and later with forced smiles and vague explanations about showings and client meetings that I suspected weren't entirely truthful. It all came crashing to a head on a quiet Sunday evening a few weeks after that dinner party. We were having takeout for dinner because neither of us had felt like cooking. Some Chinese food I'd picked up on the way home. The TV was on in the background, droning softly and filling the silence that had become way too common between us lately. Melissa was pushing her lo mein around on her plate, barely eating. Finally, she said that her friend Stacy was having a get-together the following weekend, just a casual thing with some of the girls from her office. She asked if I minded if she went. I shrugged and said, why would I mind? She didn't need my permission for anything like that. She visibly flinched at my tone. She said she knew that. She just didn't want me to feel like she was avoiding me or anything like that. The words just came out before I could stop them. I asked her directly if she was avoiding me. Melissa's eyes widened in surprise. She said no, of course not, and asked why I would even think that. I set down my chopsticks, suddenly not hungry anymore, and I told her to come on. We'd barely spoken in weeks. Every time I came home, she was either already out or on her way out the door. What was I supposed to think about that pattern? Melissa got defensive and said she'd been busy with work, that I knew how crazy the real estate market had been lately. I said flatly right, because she'd been so successful closing deals. As soon as those words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line and gone too far. Melissa recoiled like I'd physically slapped her across the face. Hurt and anger warred in her eyes. She demanded to know what that was supposed to mean. I ran my hand through my hair, feeling frustrated and tired. I said nothing, just forget I said anything. But Melissa wasn't letting it go. She pressed me, saying she wanted to know what I meant by that comment. Did I think she wasn't working hard enough? Did I think she was just playing at having a career? I protested that wasn't what I said, but Melissa was on a roll now and not stopping. She said not all of us can be big-shot consultants making six figures. Some of us are still trying to build something for ourselves. But she guessed that wasn't good enough for me, was it? I felt my own temper rising to match hers. I asked her when I had ever said that or made her feel like what she did wasn't enough. When had I ever been unsupportive of her career? Melissa shot back that I didn't have to say it out loud. It was in every disapproving look when she talked about work. Every time I brushed off her ideas for improving our life together. God forbid we actually enjoy the money I made instead of living like we were still struggling college students. I said tightly that there was nothing wrong with living within our means. Just because we didn't flaunt every penny didn't mean we were struggling in any way. Melissa let out this bitter, harsh laugh. She said our means, right? She acknowledged that we lived in a nice house in a good neighborhood, and that was great. But I acted like splurging on anything beyond the absolute basics was some kind of moral failing. Would it eliminate me to want something more? To actually enjoy life a little bit? I insisted I did enjoy life and that I enjoyed our life together. At least I thought I did. Apparently that wasn't enough for her anymore. The words hung heavy between us, loaded with implication. Melissa's face crumpled and tears started welling in her eyes. She said quietly that maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe we wanted fundamentally different things. Maybe we weren't as compatible as we'd once thought we were. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I asked her what she was saying exactly. She stood up from the table, wrapping her arms around herself in this defensive posture. She said she didn't know for sure. She needed some time to think and figure out what she really wanted from life. I started to say her name, but she was already heading for the door. She said she was going to stay with Stacy for a few days because she thought we both needed some space to figure things out. Before I could formulate any kind of response, she was gone. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the suddenly empty house. I sat there at that table for a long time, just staring at the half-eaten takeout containers and wondering how we'd gotten to this point. Part of me desperately wanted to run after Melissa, to tell her everything about my real income and the millions sitting in various accounts. But another part of me, the part that remembered my mother's lessons about the true value of things, held me back firmly. If money was all it would take to make Melissa happy and make her want to stay, was that really a marriage worth saving? Did I want a partner who only valued me for my wealth? The next few days passed in this strange blur. I went through all the motions at work, attending meetings and working on client projects, but my usual sharp focus was dulled by the constant replay of our argument in my head. I found myself reaching for my phone a dozen times each day, composing text messages to Melissa, only to delete them unsent. I didn't know what to say to her. On the fourth day after she'd left, I came home from work to find Melissa waiting for me in the living room. There was a small suitcase sitting by her feet. My heart leapt for just a moment, thinking maybe she'd come to her senses and wanted to work things out. But the grim, determined set of her mouth told a completely different story. She said we needed to talk, and I felt my world start crashing down around me. What followed was quite possibly the most surreal and painful conversation of my entire life. Melissa, her voice alternating between anger and tears, laid out all her frustrations with our marriage. She talked about how she felt completely stifled by our modest lifestyle. How she'd watched all her friends advance in their careers and upgrade their lives while she felt stuck in place, treading water. how she'd come to resent what she perceived as my lack of ambition and drive. She said she couldn't do this anymore. She'd thought she could be happy with a simple life, but she realized she wasn't and couldn't be. She wanted more from life. She said she deserved more. I listened in stunned silence while this maelstrom of emotions churned inside me. Hurt, anger, disbelief, and underneath it all, this cold, hard nugget of resolve was forming. When she finally finished, I asked if that was it. She was walking away from 5 years of marriage because I didn't make enough money for her taste. Melissa flinched at my blunt assessment. She said it wasn't just about the money. It was about feeling like we were moving forward together, like we were building something meaningful. But I was content to just exist, and she needed more than that from a partner. I nodded slowly, a plan already forming in my mind. I said I understood. I suppose she thought she'd find that more out there somewhere with someone else. Melissa said she had to try. She was still young and had time to start over and find someone who actually shared her goals and ambitions. Someone richer, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. Melissa's silence was all the answer I needed. I told her all right, if that's what she wanted, then I wouldn't stand in her way. We'd get a quick, clean divorce with no fuss. Melissa looked up, genuinely startled. She asked if I wasn't going to fight this at all. I shook my head and kept my voice steady. I asked what the point would be. She'd made it crystal clear what she wanted, and it wasn't me. Not unless I suddenly turned into some flashy millionaire overnight. I watched a flicker of regret pass through Melissa's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by determination. She nodded and squared her shoulders. She said she'd have her lawyer draw up the divorce papers and we could handle this whole thing amicably. I agreed and said my attorney, Diane, would handle everything on my end and make sure the settlement was fair. Melissa's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of me having a high-powered lawyer friend, but she didn't comment on it directly. Instead, she picked up her suitcase and hesitated for just a moment. She said softly that she was sorry. She did love me, but she just couldn't do this anymore. I finished her sentence for her, saying not enough, though. I got it. I told her to go ahead, that her new life was waiting for her out there. As the door closed behind her for what I knew was the last time, I let out a long, slow breath that I felt like I'd been holding for weeks. I walked over to the window and watched as Melissa's car pulled out of the driveway. A complicated mix of emotions swirled within me. Anger at her for giving up on us. Hurt at being judged so harshly. A surprising touch of relief that the pretense was finally over. And underneath it all, this steely determination was building. I pulled out my phone and dialed a familiar number, and when my lawyer Diane answered, I said I needed her help with something and asked how fast she could process a divorce. The next few weeks passed, in this whirlwind of paperwork, legal meetings, and terse communications. True to my word, I kept everything civil and agreed to a modest settlement that wouldn't reveal the true extent of my wealth. Melissa, who was eager to start her new life and move on, didn't push for more than what seemed reasonable based on what she thought I earned. It was during one of these meetings at the lawyer's office that I overheard a snippet of conversation between Melissa and her friend Stacy. They were huddled together in a corner of the waiting room, speaking in hushed tones that they thought were private. Stacy was telling Melissa about this guy who was apparently perfect for her. His name was Derek Cole. She said he had money, style, well, everything Melissa had been looking for, and Derek had been asking about her specifically. I turned away, feeling my jaw clench involuntarily. So Melissa had already lined up her next target before our divorce was even finalized. I shouldn't have been surprised given how quickly everything had moved, but the speed of it still stung quite a bit. The day the divorce was officially finalized, I found myself completely alone in the house we'd once shared together. I wandered from room to room with memories pressing in from all sides. In the kitchen, I paused and remembered all of Melissa's complaints about wanting to remodel it. With this sudden burst of energy, I grabbed a notepad and started sketching out plans for a complete renovation and overhaul. Why not? It was my house now, fully and completely. I could do whatever I wanted with it, without having to justify anything to anyone. As I worked on those preliminary plans, I felt this enormous weight lifting from my shoulders. For years, I'd been holding back and carefully maintaining this facade of modest success to keep Melissa grounded and prevent money from corrupting our relationship. Now I was finally free. Free to live exactly as I chose, to enjoy the fruits of my labor without guilt or need for explanation. I opened my laptop and started firing off emails to my financial advisors and investment managers. It was time to start making some very visible, very public investments. Time to let my success show. I'd give Melissa exactly what she'd said she wanted, a glimpse of the wealthy lifestyle she'd been craving so badly. But by the time she realized what she'd thrown away, it would be far, far too late to do anything about it. I began attending high-profile tech industry events and networking dinners that I'd previously avoided. I bought some tailored suits and nice clothes. I made strategic investments in promising startups and made sure to be seen in the right places with the right people. Word spreads incredibly fast in Silicon Valley's tight-knit community, and soon the rumors started flying about this suddenly successful consultant who'd apparently been hiding his wealth all along. Industry publications started mentioning my deals. My name started appearing in articles about major tech transactions. Meanwhile, across town, Melissa was on her first date with Derek Cole. She was absolutely dazzled by his charm and apparent wealth. He drove an expensive sports car, took her to the best restaurants, and talked about his successful business ventures. She had absolutely no idea of the house of cards she was walking into or the storm that was brewing on the horizon. My phone buzzed with a news alert about a rising star in the tech world. The article was about me and my recent investments. I smiled, feeling this cold, determined glint in my eye. The game was officially on. Weeks passed, and I found myself settling into a new routine that felt liberating. My days were filled with challenging work that I loved. My evenings were spent on the quiet satisfaction of finally living life completely on my own terms. The kitchen remodel was well underway with top contractors installing the best of everything. I'd started making strategic appearances at high-profile events, carefully cultivating my new public image as a successful tech consultant. One morning, I was enjoying my coffee on the patio when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I answered. The voice on the other end was shaky and uncertain. It took me a moment to place it as Melissa's voice. She asked if we could talk and said she needed to see me. The desperation in her voice was immediately obvious and palpable. My first instinct was to hang up immediately, but this cold curiosity took hold. This could be very interesting. I told her fine, we could meet at the cafe on 3rd Street in 1 hour. I arrived early and chose a table with a clear view of the entrance. Right on time, Melissa walked in and I had to genuinely stifle a gasp at her appearance. She looked absolutely terrible. Her hair was disheveled and unwashed. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her designer clothes were wrinkled and unkempt. This was definitely not the polished, ambitious woman who had confidently walked out on me just months earlier. Melissa slid into the seat across from me, her hands fidgeting nervously with her purse. She thanked me for meeting her, her voice soft and uncertain. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face completely impassive. I asked what she wanted. She took a deep breath and said she'd made a huge mistake. Everything was falling apart in her life. Derek wasn't who she'd thought he was at all. They were drowning in debt and she missed the stability we'd had together. She said she missed me. I felt my eyebrows shoot up. I said it was rich coming from her to talk about stability now. Wasn't our life too boring and modest for her taste before? Melissa flinched visibly. She said she knew. She knew she'd been stupid. She'd thought she wanted all that flash and excitement. But now she trailed off, looking completely lost. I pressed her, asking now what. She thought she'd come crawling back and I'd welcome her with open arms like nothing happened. She said no, or maybe she didn't know what she'd hoped for. Tears welled up in her eyes. She just knew she'd made the biggest mistake of her life walking away from me. I studied her for a long moment. Part of me, a part I wasn't particularly proud of, relished seeing her so broken and desperate. But mostly I felt absolutely nothing. The woman sitting in front of me was a complete stranger, someone I no longer had any desire to know. Then I dropped the bomb. I told her calmly and clearly that I made $1.5 million a year. The color completely drained from Melissa's face. She stammered that it was impossible, that I'd never mentioned anything like that. I cut her off and said I didn't think it mattered at the time. She'd left without ever really knowing me, without ever bothering to look beyond the surface level. Melissa's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like she'd been physically slapped. She finally asked why I'd never said anything, why we'd lived so modestly if I was making that much. I laughed without any humor. I told her because money isn't everything. I'd thought she understood that once upon a time. Clearly, I'd been very wrong about that. Melissa leaned forward desperately, her voice trembling. She said we could fix this, couldn't we? She'd been wrong, so stupid. She just hadn't known the truth. She begged me to please give her another chance. I looked at her, really looked at her carefully. I saw the desperation and regret written all over her face, and I felt absolutely nothing in response. No anger, no satisfaction, just this bone-deep weariness. I told her quietly that she'd already made her choice. I wasn't a second option or a safety net, and I was certainly not a fool. Before Melissa could respond, a man's voice cut through the tension between us. A tall, well-dressed man approached our table, asking what was going on. Even without an introduction, I would have immediately pegged this as Derek Cole. The flashy designer watch, the too-white smile, the expensive clothes, it all screamed new money and terrible decisions. Melissa's eyes widened in panic. She stammered that this wasn't what it looked like. They were just talking. I stood up calmly and gathered my coat. I told them I'd let them figure it out between themselves. I turned to Derek and offered him a bland, polite smile. I told him good luck, because he was definitely going to need it. As I walked off, I could still hear Melissa rushing to explain herself, while Derek snapped back in anger. I never turned around. Instead of feeling tired, I felt strangely alive. That moment gave me a surge of energy. I dove into my work with fresh drive and sharp focus. I took on major clients, landed big deals, and started gaining real notice in the tech space. My name showed up more and more in trade articles, and word of my rise spread fast across Silicon Valley. At one of those tech events, I met someone who changed my life. Her name was Iris Chen. She was on stage talking about new ways to build smarter software. But it wasn't just her ideas that drew me in. It was how real and grounded she seemed, which was rare in that world. After her talk, I introduced myself during the mixer. I told her I enjoyed the presentation. Her grip was firm, her smile warm. She joked that she worried the tech talk might bore people. I laughed and said the opposite. I told her approach was smart and asked how she put it into practice. We slipped into an easy back and forth, trading stories and ideas. I hadn't felt that kind of mental spark in a long time. As the night wrapped up, neither of us seemed eager to end the talk. I admitted I might be bold, but asked if she wanted to grab coffee and keep the chat going outside a work setting. She paused, then said yes, with one condition. She wasn't chasing status, money, or power. If that was my goal, she'd rather stop now. I couldn't help but smile. I told her that was the most honest thing I'd heard in ages. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through the city. We talked about tech, books, childhood memories, and values. I opened up to her in ways I never had with Melissa. I told her about my past, my mom's struggles, and how I viewed money and success. She shared her story too, her love for coding and her wish to build tools that actually helped people. She was sharp, kind, and totally unimpressed by wealth or image. As weeks passed, then months, I realized I felt lighter and happier than I had in years. We balanced each other well, pushing, supporting, and growing together. One quiet Sunday morning, sitting on my patio over breakfast, Iris finally brought up a topic we'd been avoiding. She said it was time to talk about the obvious. I asked what she meant. She smiled and said the fact that I clearly had serious money but lived like a regular guy. She said she liked that, but wanted the full story. I took a breath and told her everything. My childhood, my mother, Melissa, the marriage, the choice to keep my wealth private, and how that choice backfired. When I finished, Iris reached across the table and held my hand. She thanked me for trusting her. I told her it felt easy, and that's when I knew what we had was real. Then she smiled and said she had a confession too. My heart jumped. She said she'd secretly hoped I'd offer to fund her startup. I froze, then she burst out laughing and said she was joking. But then she got serious. She said she did have ideas for tech projects that focused on real social good. She wasn't asking for money, only partnership if I ever wanted to build something together. I smiled wide and said I'd love that. I held out my hand and said, "Partners?" She shook it and said the same. While all this was happening, Melissa's world was falling apart fast. Derek's smooth image cracked wide open and she was trapped in a mess of her own making. It began quietly. Bills stamped final notice. Phone calls that stopped when she walked in. Then one night, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She asked Derek what he meant when he said the business was struggling, because he'd promised everything was fine. Derek paced the apartment, stressed and shaken. He said he thought things would turn around. More funding was supposed to come in, but it never did. Melissa pressed him for the truth. His shoulders dropped. He admitted they were broke, worse than broke, deep in debt. Her head spun. This couldn't be real. Not again. She asked about the cars, the penthouse, the life they'd built. Derek laughed bitterly. He said it was all fake. Leases, loans from shady places. He believed that if they looked rich, they'd become rich. Fake it till you make it. Melissa collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. Over and over, she whispered the same words. What have I done? As time went on, their lives didn't just fall apart. They collapsed fast. The bank took back the penthouse. The car dealer reclaimed the leased cars. With nowhere else to go, they moved into a cramped apartment in a rundown area Melissa once mocked and avoided. She reached out to old friends, hoping someone would help, but the news had spread quickly. People who once welcomed her now ignored her. Calls went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. Even Stacy, the friend who had set her up with Derek, cut off all contact. With no options left, Melissa tried to rebuild her real estate career from the ground up. But her name carried a stain she couldn't erase. No firm wanted her. No one trusted her. One night, after another long day of rejection, she sat staring at her phone. My number lit up the screen like a last lifeline. Her finger paused over the call button. Derek's voice came from the doorway, sharp and cold. He told her not to do it. She had chosen him. And this was her life now. Melissa studied him closely. The smooth, confident man she married was gone. In his place stood someone bitter and angry, blaming her for everything. She asked softly if this was truly what he wanted. He laughed, harsh and cruel, and said it didn't matter anymore. This was reality, and she needed to accept it. When he stormed off, she looked back at her phone. Her hands shaking, she pressed call. It rang once, then went to voicemail. The message said I wasn't available, and that business matters should go through my assistant. Personal calls, it said, probably shouldn't use that number. Her chest tightened. Even my voicemail sounded different now, steady, confident, successful. Everything she once chased, without realizing she'd already had it. She whispered an apology into the phone. She said she was wrong. She begged for a callback and asked for help. When she hung up, tears soaked her face. Deep down, she knew the truth. No one was coming to save her. There would be no redo. This was the cost of her choice. Across the city, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the missed call, saw her name, and blocked the number without a second thought. Iris looked up from her laptop and asked if something was wrong. I smiled, calm and sincere, and told her everything was perfect. Now I'll admit something I'm not proud of. I did play a role in Derek's business collapse. Over the years, I built strong ties across Silicon Valley, investors, banks, funds, and key decision makers. I knew exactly who listened and when. And I may have quietly shared that Derek's company was a bad bet, that it had no real structure, that it ran on debt, not value, that anyone backing it would lose money. I made sure the right people heard the truth at the right moment. None of it was false. Derek's operation was smoke and mirrors. He borrowed nonstop, created an image of wealth, and hid the fact that nothing solid existed underneath. I didn't lie. I simply made sure others saw what I already knew. Funding vanished almost overnight. Credit lines closed. Partners walked away. Within weeks, the company folded and filed for bankruptcy. Was it harsh? Yes. Do I regret it? No. Melissa chose flash over trust, and Derek was a fraud who earned his fall. They made their decision. I only made sure the fallout came fast. Later, Iris asked if I had been involved. I told her the truth. She said it was ruthless and maybe crossed lines, but she understood why I did it. She asked only one thing, that I not let revenge shape who I became. I promised her I was done with the past. After the bankruptcy, things only got worse for Melissa and Derek. They argued nonstop about money and blame. Derek accused her of bringing ruin into his life. She pushed back, saying she never knew the reach of my wealth or influence. Eventually, Derek said he was leaving for Los Angeles, claiming a friend could help him restart. He told her she could come or stay. It was up to her. Melissa looked at him and realized she wanted neither path. She told him to go alone. They were never a real team, she said, just two people using each other. When Derek left, Melissa was truly alone. She took a receptionist job at a struggling real estate office. It was far below the future she once imagined. She moved into a tiny studio in a rough area and lived paycheck to paycheck. Every day became a struggle just to buy food and keep the lights on. A few months later, I ran into her by pure chance. I was walking out of a work lunch with Iris and a few senior coworkers when someone called my name from the street. I turned around and almost didn't know it was Melissa. She looked exhausted and worn out. Her hair was unkempt. Dark shadows sat under her eyes, and her clothes were cheap and badly creased. This was nothing like the confident woman who once left me. She asked how I was doing, and I told her honestly that life was good. She said she was trying to rebuild and barely getting through each day. Then she noticed Iris beside me, quietly attractive, calm, and clearly happy to be there with me. I watched Melissa's face change as she slowly understood what she was seeing. Before I could walk away, she asked me straight out if I was behind Derek's company failing and going broke. I answered calmly that the tech world is harsh and unforgiving. Derek jumped into things he didn't fully understand and went up against people who were far more prepared. She accused me of ruining their lives on purpose. I didn't raise my voice. I told her I hadn't destroyed anyone. I simply let the results of her own choices unfold. She had chosen excitement and shine over trust and balance, and this was where that road had led. Suddenly her attitude collapsed. Her eyes filled with tears and she broke down crying. She said she'd made a massive mistake. She apologized for everything and said she'd been blind and foolish. She admitted she never knew the truth about my finances and claimed that if she had, things between us would have turned out very differently. She begged me to take her back and fix things. I stood there quietly, thinking. Part of me wanted to enjoy the moment and point out how wrong she'd been. Another part felt a small sense of sadness. We had shared 5 years together, after all. But more than anything, I felt empty. The woman in front of me felt like a stranger. I told her I accepted her apology, but it changed nothing. We had both made our choices. I said I wasn't her fallback plan or emergency exit. Then I gave her one honest piece of advice. Stop waiting for someone else to save you and learn how to stand on your own. It might actually help her grow. At that moment, Derek walked up behind her. He looked tense and angry, demanding to know who I was and what was happening. I picked up my coat and told them I'd leave them to sort it out. I looked at Derek, smiled politely, and wished him luck. He was going to need it. As Iris and I walked away, I heard Melissa scrambling to explain while Derek's voice grew louder and angrier. I never looked back. Later that night, Iris asked if I was okay. I told her I truly was. She asked if I felt bad about what happened to Derek's company. I thought carefully and said no. They made their decisions, and those decisions had consequences. I was finished with that chapter of my life. Then Iris smiled and shared some great news. The ethical tech project we had been building together had secured full funding from several backers. We were officially ready to launch. A deep sense of calm washed over me. This was what really mattered. Building something meaningful with someone who cared about me for who I truly was. That conversation happened about 6 months ago. Iris and I are still together, and our bond is stronger than ever. The project is thriving and helping real people. We're seriously talking about moving in together and creating a shared future. Recently, I heard that Melissa lost her small apartment after falling behind on rent. She had no choice but to move back in with her parents in Sacramento, completely defeated. Derek, from what I've heard, disappeared to escape his debts, leaving chaos behind him. A while ago, I saw a foreclosure notice online with Melissa's name on it. For a brief second, I thought about reaching out, but then I heard Iris laughing from the kitchen, calling me over to show me something she was excited about. And I realized I didn't care anymore. Melissa chose appearances over reality. She gave up something real for something empty and paid dearly for it. I learned that hiding who you are doesn't protect relationships, it only delays the truth. Now I'm with someone who sees me clearly, knows exactly who I am, and loves me anyway. Someone who would stand by me whether I had millions or nothing at all. That kind of love is worth more than money ever could be. People say the best revenge is living well, and I believe that's true. Though I'll admit, helping karma move things along felt good at the time. Still, I don't live in the past anymore. My focus is on the future I'm building with someone who truly deserves to be there. This whole experience taught me powerful lessons about honesty, about choosing depth over image, and about being real with the people who matter. Melissa wanted the look of wealth without caring what was underneath. She got exactly that. Someone who looked successful but was empty and broke. I found real happiness with someone who doesn't care about my bank balance at all. And that's how this story really ends. Not with drama or revenge, but with growth, peace, and a better life. Honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better ending.